soon as folks are situated. Oh, why is it? Oh, it's the wrong way. I see what's happening. It's the wrong. How we? Yeah, I don't know how to do it once we. Oh, there we go. Shkoya. Okay, excellent.
But I see it every on my email.
Yeah, she's one of my.
Is this the main room?
This is the main room.
You're not from
Yeah.
Wait for people to figure out where they're going.
I will. See you later.
Why do I have to be out for you? I don't say that.
I know, I'd rather, but okay.
Just want to make sure everyone has.
Okay. This is the Torah of the internet. Is everyone in the right place? Yeah? You're with us? Yeah? I'm not offended if you want to go listen to Erin, to Dr. Rabbi Erin. She's awesome.
Just want to make sure everyone has sessions.
We can hit this.
Let's start off here. Thank you.
I'm learning.
Are you?
Sorry,
Some can I help you?
start.
You're with us? Come closer. Yeah, why don't you just come closer? I mean, this, with a small group like this, we can just treat it as a conversation.
Should we pull the chairs around and
This is fine. Okay.
And the date.
Yeah, we should leave it open in case other people want to. So my name is Lev. I work with Sefaria. Folks know it. Yeah, you know Sefaria? Okay. So that's my. This is the class. This is the class that I've been giving. This is the class that I've been giving in different forms for years. Yes, I guess there's noise from the hallway, so I'm gonna have to. Should I pull the curtain down?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
okay.
Can we go back down? At least
It sounds
great. I feel like I'm in the Aaron Kodesh here.
Kaddish Kaddish.
Here, we can pass some of these around.
Thank you.
So yeah, my name is Lev Israel. My day job, I think, maybe a little different than most of the people who are on the schedule here. My day job is not in rabbinics. Squarely, my day job is in technology. I'm, if you will, the technology of Jewish education. So I'm working for a company called Safari, where we're working to digitize and open the world of the Beit Midrash, the world of Jewish texts. I'm trying to think there's half an hour to speak here, and I probably should just have my phone out so that I have a sense of what the timing is. The question that's always on my mind, and this is very much a lived question for me, is what is happening to Torah? What's happening to knowledge as it's really a broader question than Torah. What's happening to education and human knowledge as we move into digital media? And it's not a simple question. It's not an obvious question. It's a question that's actually very difficult to get a handle on because of how immersed we are in the technology. So in order to gain some sense of there's a few more. In order to gain some sense of what's going on, what I endeavor to do is look at similar sea changes in media historically. Similar places where the way knowledge was communicated shifted dramatically. And maybe what are the ones that come to mind when we think about sea changes in media historically, major changes in media?
Radio to television.
Radio to television is a big one, yeah.
the printing press?
The printing press, sure, in early 1400s, yeah.
What about the written?
to written. Yeah. You can even think about the alphabet itself as a from pictograms to a phonetic alphabet as a major shift in media. Given that we have just a couple minutes, the one it's it's a very short moment here. The one I really want to focus on is the shift from oral culture to written culture. Oh, are you an expert in the shift from oral culture to written culture? Am I going to put my foot in my mouth here? Should I ask you to tell me your name and your
I'm just here to learn and listen.
Oh, great. And then you'll tell me how wrong I am. That's great. All right. Shmuley, the simulcast here has a low battery.
Oh, it's an offense.
So interestingly, how the rabbis felt, or at least some aspect of how the rabbis felt about the shift from oral culture to written culture, is recorded in writing. And let the irony of that not go by too quickly. But we have written record of how they felt of the written record. And maybe the first two sources here. The first one I think we'll look at quickly just to get a sense of a taste of the venom, and then the second one I want to look at a touch more deeply. So Hebrew, people are reasonably comfortable in Hebrew, or we'll do both Hebrew and English, or maybe we can focus in English and I'll highlight pieces in Hebrew that I think are notable. So Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi said. So Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, we're talking about 250 CE. He's a first generation Amora. So one generation after the codification of the Mishnah, about 250. He says, one who writes down Agadah, one who writes down the stories of the oral Torah, has no portion, meaning no portion in the world to come. He's going to hell. But and colloquially, he's not part of eternal life. Right? You write something down, that's it, you're going to hell. One who works it, meaning one who studies from it or endeavors to create it, burdens himself. One who hears it receives no benefit. So, right here, me, I'm burning myself. You have no benefit. Right? Because we're learning from a printed text. He's saying that the kind of learning that happens from printed text, worse than useless. And if you were perhaps not clear on this point, he says, once I looked in a book of Agadah, I found written there, and in the Yerushalmi it says what he found written, and he explicates and what have you, and he says, even though I only looked in a written book of Agadah once, I still wake up with night terrors. That moment of looking at a written record, gave him chills, continually. He said, this is terrible. Looking at the next source, I think here I'm gonna roll through the back and forth of this pretty quickly, because I think the large of it is at the end. In the course of a discussion, I don't think it matters exactly what the topic was, but Rabbi said, if I had a messenger, I'd write a letter and I'd ask Rabbi Yochanan. Right? I'd ask Rabbi Yochanan what his opinion was, because there was debate about what Rabbi Yochanan's opinion was. So the Talmud, from Tamura, in the Babylonian Talmud, he says, a letter? Right? If you had a letter, could you even send it? Right? Didn't we say, anyone who writes down halachot, didn't Rabbi Barabba say in the name of Rabbi Yochanan himself, one who writes down halachot, it's like he burned the Torah. And if he learned from it, he receives no reward. Let's skip down to the end. So they maybe 4 lines from the bottom. He said, perhaps a new matter is different, that he's writing a question rather than writing down a tradition. I'm trying to decide. I don't want to go too deep into it because of the time. But ultimately, the question is, can you be writing these things down? And there's a shock. Like, how could you possibly be writing these things down? But then a proof is brought from Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, and I think it's notable. Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, the same Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, are second generation Amoraim. So this is one generation after Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. And it says they were ma'ayin b'sefer Agadata b'Shabbata. They would, on the Sabbath, look at written records of Agadah. And the explanation they gave is from a pasuk, Eit lasot Hashem aferu Toratecha. So this is, I think this is something that anyone who went to day school or learned kind of the traditional story of the writing down the Mishnah, I think the way it's often presented, and I think it comes from the Rambam, is Rebbe saw that people were forgetting their learning, so he stood up and said, Eit lasot Hashem aferu Toratecha, and he wrote down the Mishnah. So pasuk. That's the end of the story. The way it's written in the Talmud is a little bit more subtle, and I want to get into a detail of one of the presentations of it. So they said it's time to act for the Lord because they have overturned your Torah, or if there are two ways to read it, or in a time when it's time to act for the sake of God, then go ahead and overturn your Torah is really the way it's understood here. So it's a little. An adventurous reading in the verse. So the Talmud goes explicitly spells out this adventurous reading. It says it's better that the Torah be uprooted rather than the Torah be forgotten. Meaning, since it is time to act, so we will overturn the Torah so the Torah will be remembered. I want to read one more line, and then maybe let's stop and think about this a second. I feel like I'm rushing because I have the weight of the clock behind me here. The same back and forth is presented in Gittin, which is our next source, and it's identical except for the three words I have highlighted, and those are three words that are very easy to read through because they seem to be just structural. So Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish, ma'ayin b'sefer Agadata b'Shabbata, they would learn this Agadah on Shabbat. And v'ha lo nitan lichtav, you're not allowed to write this stuff down. Ella kevan delo efshar, since it's not possible. Eit lasot l'Hashem aferu Toratecha, the same verse. If it's time to act for God, overturn the Torah. So that kevan delo efshar said, since it's impossible. Why would it be impossible not to write something down? And that's what they're saying, that we had to write it down, it wasn't possible otherwise. What's the impossibility?
That people would remember it if it's not.
Okay, so maybe memory, like there's a lack of, it just wouldn't be remembered if we didn't write it down. We need it as a memory aid.
I think it's because it's on Shabbat, it could imply that they can't travel to people who do know it, so it's an accessibility.
Oh, interesting. That you're saying since settlement was more dispersed, people couldn't find a teacher nearby on Shabbat. That's interesting. I never thought of that. Huh?
People didn't respond to the oral tradition like they used to, so that the medium that they understood was now.
So that points to a larger cultural shift, that they were shifting into a world where writing was immediate and understandable, and orality just didn't catch anymore.
I don't have a fully formed thought around this, but I just can't help but wonder if there's something significant to being a gada and not halacha. It would seem like that'd be less of a problem if it was written down because
writing down the gada is less of a problem.
It would seem so.
There's a big scholarly trend, like in academic circles, to make that point that writing down halachot is a problem, but a gada not so much of a problem. But I've talked with some of the professors who say so, and none of them has been able to do anything with this first source. That first Yerushalmi seems pretty clear that you write down Haggadah, you have no source in the world, you're going to hell. It's hard to avoid that. That there seems to be a tension around writing writ large, and not merely about writing down law. Although you would see the problem in recording law in that it become ossified. That once it becomes written down, it's frozen in a way that an oral tradition would not be frozen. So that's another concern that.
Also, when their stories of the communities went from one storyteller to another, it changed
Yeah.
from one time to another.
Sure.
And if we didn't write it down, things change along the way.
Right. So I wonder. It seems like that changing was seen as a benefit, but I could imagine that at a certain point it could be seen in the other way as well. Meaning, as long as those who did the changing and the telling were trusted, then it's a benefit, because it's living. Once it starts to be told by those who are not trusted, it's no longer a benefit. So maybe that could also be since it's no longer possible. It could be since we now have a competing religion which is similar enough to be confusable. And in this time period, they were confusable. Maybe at that point, it's no longer possible to trust the tellers to carry the tale. That's interesting. Yeah.
I'm curious what was the response with Rabbi Nasi's writing down of the Mishnah with Rabbi Chia's Tosefta, and just still having the Brightot kind of lingering Baal Peh orally. I'm curious what was going on here when they say Agada. Could it be that the Agada that they're referring to now is not really... No, the Tosefta was written already, right? We already know that Rabbi Chia wrote it, but he preserved the Brightot. The question is, this is like 2-3 generations later, could it be that there was a shift, that Agada is not necessarily Agada, like Agadata, that actually translated the Gemara, but actually the conversations within the Beit Midrash of the Amoraim, which was a little bit more, I guess, loosey-goosey, it wasn't as, it could be infused with halacha as well.
Right.
But those conversations themselves were what we weren't ready to actually write down, which in fact we don't really officially write down to like the 500. So
Yeah, I hear the question. I don't know.
Something.
I don't know. That's an interesting question. I never stopped to think of it that way. I always assumed that the halacha and the agadah here were as we understood, but it's worth investigating. I hear that. I hear it.
Agada was really consistent. Sorry, I usurped his.
Yeah.
No, just going back to what you were saying, I think, you can look at it not just in terms of the, halacha versus agadata, but just the style. Like, the halacha is not like, the Beit Yosef now or something. It's, it's very, very short, very succinct, to the point.
Yeah.
And, that compared to that, which is, run a couple of lines, have more nuance.
Okay.
Adjectives are important, maybe, it's
that
different.
It's more, harder to memorize, less.
And then, just also the retelling changes the meaning in some sense. Whereas, if you had a very, a couple of words on a halacha and a psak, then it kind of is what it is, And I wonder if it's the style is also kind of part of it.
What's looking at as a whole, just assuming that any Torah, that there's a stress around writing any Torah down, any of the oral Torah down whatsoever. Why? Like, why such a stress around it? Like, we talked about the ossification as a worry. Is there any other reason we would not want to be writing things down?
Yeah, I think there are two levels that you can look at this, and there are other factors in Jewish law, other aspects where you see the same thing. You have concerns, and then you have an overall thing of a cataclysmic change in the way information is being handled. I gave a shiur on machine matzah versus hand matzah, and it was about 2 years ago. My grandson was sitting at the shiur, and basically there were certain concerns about the chametz getting caught and how you do it. Can you make matzah lishma? Can a machine have a mind? And so some people were totally against it. Some people were okay with it.
Yeah.
But aside from the concerns, this was the machine age, industrial revolution,
concern of the
coming
machine.
into conflict with halacha. Well, halacha coming into conflict with the machine age.
Right, so there's a question, how do we
And the
relate to
people just
machines
they
in
want to
general?
handle it. It's a new thing.
Yeah.
I remember in YU, when I was in YU, the Encyclopedia Talmudis came out.
Yeah.
Some of the old Rebbeim,
The first volume.
it's Reader's Digest.
Yeah.
You know, it's no good. Forget it. Some of the more enlightened Rebbeim, and I don't go by age, some of them were older Rebbeim, but they were a little bit more modern. And they say, difficult sugya. Look it up in the Encyclopedia Talmudist. Don't tell anybody I told you. don't tell anybody the base matter.
So you're saying one of the reasons they'd be stressed about writing it down is just worry about the dramatic shift and not like what's on the other side of that. Like there's something going on in it, and even if we can't see beyond it, it's frightening. That would be the concern.
Yeah. So my comment was that I got most of my information from the internet. I happened to print out a book from for that shiur. But I said, when my 14-year-old grandson is 68 and he gives a shiur, how does he get shiur information?
Yeah.
And that's what the issue is.
I reminds me of what people are saying about art scroll and how we have all these books of like halacha and like so much of this came out of the Holocaust and there's so much knowledge was lost. Like you didn't there's been such ossification and such like a right-wing or sort of tendency in making stock and making and doing like because there's this lost tradition and it's all coming from these books that rule extremely. And it's like, but it had to be written down because otherwise people are worried that that'd be lost. And so
loss of tradition.
Loss of knowledge, loss of tradition, and just having to
I want to just draw out what I hear you saying in that we have the books from before. It's actually I think a good historical moment to put a finger on. We have the books from before the Holocaust, but because the human relations, because the human contact was severed in a dramatic way, much was lost there. And I think that probably points an arrow to part of what they were worrying about, that once you write things down, there's a drift away from human contact. I think part of their understanding was that Torah is something that is spoken by a mouth and heard by an ear. That was the world they lived in. Torah is something that is spoken from a mouth and heard by, and in the same moment heard by an ear. And that connection, how a person moves his or her hands, what their expression is, the tone of voice, none of that is carried in the medium of the phonetic alphabet. None of it can be carried.
And the major concern about Torah Shabbat and Torah Shvalpat, and the concern that once you write something, it becomes static and fixed.
Yeah.
And there could be a confusion, right, also, that when you write something down, what is something divine, or is it something that is human intervention?
Right. The confusion, especially with the written Torah, that it's like, okay, it was all given in Sinai, right? It's all the same, right? There's Bereshit Bara Elohim and there's Me'imatai. They're the same.
Right.
It's supposed to be relational, but relationship is sent a black letter versus law, which usually ends up being stricter than otherwise.
The written. Yeah, that what someone's comfortable writing down is more strict than what they're comfortable telling the person.
Yeah, often.
Yeah. So here, because we just have a few moments. I want to. We're gonna water ski. We're gonna water ski this one. I'm sorry it's gonna move so fast, but I want to just plant a couple ideas branching off of this for moving forward. I grabbed a little bit of the Wikipedia entry for the printing press, just for the history of it. And part of what I want you to think about here is it was created when it brought to Europe essentially from China, but brought into the European milieu in 1439, 1440. That's when Gutenberg put together a bunch of different technologies, movable type being the big one. And started pressing books like crazy. So take a look at this. That in the first few decades, then there were printing presses in I think 200 cities. By 1500s, there were 20 million volumes. So 20 million automatically pressed volumes. Moving from a world where everything had to be laboriously written out by hand into a world where everything is pretty much just spit out. And then it jumped an order of magnitude in the next 100 years. So we're talking about an exponential curve of the availability of printed material. exponential curves are wildly destabilizing to culture. We've got a bunch of them going on right now, but this is a primary one in the Middle Ages. So picturing that, and then this picture, maybe just before, if you haven't looked already, can you say whether this is handwritten or whether this is printed on a printing press? Right, to my eye, it looks like it's handwritten, right? It's actually printed on a printing press, an early printing press. It's an incunabula. It's from 1476. The reason it looks like it's handwritten is because each of these little pieces of movable type had to be like basically handmade. They didn't have the industrial processes to make them in regular ways so that every letter would look identical to the other. So it comes across any page will come across looking like handwriting because no two letters are identical. Some of the signals that we use to determine if something is printed weren't there. And that's worth remembering. This happens to be the colophon to an early printed Torah. And it's hard to read, but one of the things it says is, written with many quills, with no miracles. It's the printer's advertisement in the back. And he goes on to say, I've got this one system opposite another system. I can print 4 pages at once and 2 sides and 2,000 pages a day. It's amazing. Come print your books by me. So there's a great excitement in this Jewish printer. It's Konat is his name. On the other side, Chaim ben Mitzalos, this is the brother of the Maharal, writing, and he writes you can read his language. He writes a long mashal, and it seems kind of interesting. Like, why are you going to this mashal? And so you get to the sharp edge of it, where he says a person likes to eat home cooked food. He says a person likes to eat home cooked food. They like to eat their own food. They're really not interested in eating someone else's food. They're really not interested in a set table. They're really not interested in a shulchan aruch. Right? So he goes out of his way to draw a metaphor that allows him to say, I like my home cooked food. I really don't like the buffet. That what was happening is that in the Ashkenazi world of the Beit Midrash, there were manuscripts, and they would be marked up with writing along the side. Each manuscript was a prized possession and became a unique work because the Rosh Yeshiva who held it, say it was a Shari Dura, the Rosh Yeshiva who held it would be writing his comments along the side. And we find different editions of the Shari Dura that have diverged with the comments of the yeshiva that they were in, and then into this mixture where the people learning in yeshiva were basically learning more from, yes, they were written texts, but they weren't like widely distributed, and they were unique, and each community had its own customs. Into this milieu, all of a sudden, 2,000 copies a day of the Shulchan Aruch come up from Italy. Right? And this is an Ashkenazi view, and so you have this pushback of like, no, we want our local food here. We don't want this set table. There's an argument from like kosher Elkanan Reiner, who he argues that the Ramah the Ramah who wrote a commentary on the Shulchan Aruch was basically a hack. It was one of the most ingenious media hacks of Jewish history, where he said, we have this set codified, printed law book, and I am going to hack it back into the world of conversation by writing my commentary inter alia between each line, so that it is no longer essentially a set table. And okay, we can call what I'm doing the tablecloth, but really what he's doing is breaking open this ossified printed text back into the world of conversation. And if you open up the Shulchan Aruch now, you can see it's still rife with commentary, and it's still growing. Right? It is resolutely not a set in stone printed book. The question that you could get like a sense from that what the impact was and what the fear was, and then the response there seems genius. Part of what I'm wondering how to do in this day and age, and particularly with my my work at Sefaria, is how to understand what's happening with the internet, and how to perhaps tap into some of the wisdom of the Ramah of how to keep the relationships that were at the heart of concern for the early Amoraim, and the conversation which was at the heart of concern for the Ramah, how to make sure that those continue to be part of what goes on as people digest much of their Torah through the internet. It's not a simple question. It's not something I have an obvious answer to. We're coming to the moment when I'm supposed to be winding up here. So on the last page, I put just a couple things which are really food for thought. And these aren't things that I feel that I can teach, but they're things that I feel are challenging enough for me that they bear consideration. So Marshall McLuhan is a media theorist, and he has his he has his discontents. They're not everyone was so enamored with him, but I thought he presented some wonderfully challenging questions for how media impacts people. He's probably best known for saying the medium is the message, and what he meant to say there was that there are all these people talking about what's on TV. It doesn't so much matter as the fact that everyone's watching TV, and it's changing the way we behave and understand the world. So here too, everyone's talking about what's on the internet, and it doesn't make as much difference so much as everyone's on the internet, and we all have these phones in our pockets. How does that rewire how we understand the world and how we imbibe knowledge? How we, what's the epistemological concern? So he says, similarly, he says we shape our tools and then they shape us. But one of the things that he claims, which I think is interesting, is that it's not, the electronic media is not a further step in the same direction as the printing press. Because the printing press was essentially a center margin kind of technology. If you had power, if you were affiliated with the government for a long, long time, you could print something. And if you print something, then people will receive it and read it, and then you can basically control what the culture is, control what's printed. Whereas digital technology, it is more of a fabric. There are some center margin aspects of it when you think about the power centers of Facebook and Google and what have you. But part of what they're even doing is empowering other people to speak. So it's hard to escape the fact that at its root, the technology is not a center margin kind of technology, but a web network kind of technology where each person is empowered to speak to every other person. So part of what Marshall McLuhan is arguing is that this is actually reversing what happened in the printing press and bringing us back to, and also reversing even aspects of manuscript culture and bringing us back to a tribal kind of orientation where we can listen to anyone, but we only listen to the people we're comfortable with, and we end up clustered in these tribal groups, and that part of the tribalization that we're seeing nowadays, and I think we can smell it in our culture and in our politics, is actually due to the media itself. That the media itself is driving a return a world where powerful and persuasive voices need not get any kind of official power, official government, license or monetary. They can act and influence without any great resources, and draw people to them and act sort of independently. I say all this, not speaking from a place of expertise, but sort of sharing you in with my own process, my own understanding, as I'm trying to wrap my head around what's going on with these technologies. Just another piece of food for thought, that the second to last thing there, a study that noted that someone who writes by hand remembers things much better than someone who types. And what that hints at is that our processes of thought using a pencil are different than our processes of thought in typing. And part of what the study seeks to show, and I think is persuasive and proven, is that when you use a pencil, you have to write slowly enough so that you think about what you're writing and what you're hearing. Whereas when you're typing, you're just reflecting, and it's not giving you a moment. Let me say one more thing, and then we can break. This is a very drastic distillation of other classes that I give, and also other conversations that my coworkers and other people in wider spheres are giving. That last link will link you to a whole wider world of sources along these themes, and there's much more down that path. I think I'll say that's it for now, and then we can move into.
Okay, Shreya. Excellent. Okay, finish.